Welcome to On the Line. I'm Christine Williams. Coming up for discussion on our Viewpoints Hour, a Tamil rally in Toronto condemning Ottawa. A man loses his court bid to have OHIP pay for life-saving surgery out of the country. And how beneficial and logical is it to apologize for historic wrongs? Stay tuned. And these are the issues we're presenting today to our Viewpoints guests for commentary. Thousands of Tamils united in a rally waving Tamil guerrilla flags and condemning Ottawa for banning a Tamil group under the Anti-Terrorism Act. A Toronto man has lost his court battle to have OHIP reimburse him for a life-saving transplant operation he received overseas. And a trend over the last 2 decades, apologies for all kinds of historic wars, terrors, and sins. One columnist calls it puzzling and misguided. Now let's meet our Viewpoints guests. Robert Metz is president of the Freedom Party, and Husein Hamdani is a corporate lawyer. And you're now vice chair of
the North American Spiritual Revival.
Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, this organization tries to encourage spirituality in the daily lives of people, whether it comes from the Christian, Muslim, Judaic, whatever your faith community is. We try to encourage spirituality and energize the soul.
Wow, something that definitely needs energizing these days. Well, let's take a look at our first topic, because once again, before I go on, you the viewer, you're our third guest. We want to hear your thoughts as we discuss the topics for today. So take a look at the first one. Here we go. There's the headline. Canadian Tamils hold rally condemn Ottawa's ban. Now, this is a very interesting story because it goes back to the whole issue with Ottawa banning that particular group, and it drew thousands of people. But the reason why it was, in a nutshell, that group was banned, the Tamil group, is because it was believed to be funding a group, I guess labeled as a terrorist group, back in Sri Lanka. So here we have a case, and I'm going to put it in my words, a problem back home, whatever country that may be, in this case Sri Lanka, and it's found itself here. Now, the protesters, and we're going to be discussing this as we go, are saying that, look, you've got a Sri Lankan government that's basically oppressing all these people, but the other side said, not really. That when you look at the Tamil Tigers, according to one of the quotes in this particular article, they're the ones that are creating a lot of the atrocities and problems that we see going on in Sri Lanka. But my question to you, the audience, how should the Canadian government be responding? Because according to this rally, we need to get involved. We need to be looking at what's going on overseas and taking this seriously, not putting out bans. And I'd like to know how you feel. Is it our problem in our country? How do you deal with an issue like this? Is it dividing the country? Where do you draw the line? I'm going to start with you on this one, Robert.
Well, I'm not even sure what they're asking the Canadian government to do in terms of the problem overseas. They don't want to be labeled as terrorists, but they have been as such. The movement has been, not just by the Canadian government, but also by the American Justice Department, also by most European nations.
And the Sri Lankan Consul General.
And the Sri Lankan government. So I can't, you know, being not there to know the facts and not knowing everything, I have to accept those judgments as being somewhat valid, especially since there's more than one. And there are several groups that suggest that, okay, this is a terrorist group. I have to accept it on that basis. Unless they can present evidence to prove otherwise, instead of, you know, chanting and being in front of crowds doesn't present evidence. If anything, that that might speak to a little bit of guilt there. If anything.
Waving the flag, waving the guerrilla flag.
Sure, you don't need thousands of people in a courtyard to prove your point. All you need is the proof, you know, the court of law type of thing. So, what do they want the government to do? I don't really know. If all they want is for us to stop labeling them as terrorists, to take them off a terrorist list, I bet you they'd be happy with that to some degree.
But they're upset with the Canadian government for even identifying that group as a terrorist group and
banning
would you be
if you were a terrorist,
outlawing that group.
I mean, any criminal would be upset with being identified as such. A shoplifter would act the same way. So I'm not too sure that there's anything different there that you'd expect psychologically anyway.
Husein, how do you feel about this?
I got two almost contradictory thoughts here.
Now, thousands showed up. We need to understand this. Thousands showed out to that rally that was kept quite quiet if you want to put it that way. Because according to what I understand in this article, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, on one hand you say to yourself, well, to have a rally of this size, you need to have a license. But the article says clearly that the police were called at one point to shut down that license, considering that this is an outlawed group. Now, the article does not say explicitly that, yes, the license was revoked. However, it almost infers it, because it indicates that it was kept quiet until the Friday right before the protest took place, and done quite secretively.
Well, I think there's two different Tamil movements,
or
two groups
yes.
that are taking place here. And this is happening in and around Scarborough, which has a very large Tamil community.
That's right.
And so you have the World Tamil Movement, and that's the group that got banned. They are accused, what the Canadians accuse the World Tamil Movement of doing is collecting funds here in Canada and then sending the funds
right.
overseas to help the Tamil Tigers. There's another Tamil group in Scarborough that says, hey, these guys are terrorists, and don't give them a license to have this rally. And so that you see the conflict within the Tamil community. What I was saying about I have two different thoughts is, on the one hand, the Canadian government has been very clear that when it comes to terrorism, that they will do whatever it takes to protect not only Canada, but to make sure Canada isn't a launching pad or isn't a means or a tool to terrorists overseas. So in this case, it's consistent with the Canadians' terrorist policy, which is, if you're raising funds for what we deem as a terrorist organization, we're going to shut you down. I think what many of the Tamils in this article are upset about, not just this article, I think many of the Tamils are upset about, is I think the lack of conversation that they had with this organization or with the Tamil community. And so you can come and say, you're a terrorist, and that's it, we're cutting you off. But they say, well, what's your evidence labeling us the terrorist? And I think that's what many of them are upset about is, look, we never had that conversation. You're making this decision unilaterally. It's not the Tamil Tigers we're talking about. We're talking about the World Tamil Movement. So I think that community has the right to hear why they're being labeled as a terrorist organization.
Okay, let's hear what Brian has to say on line 4. Brian, you're on the line.
Hi.
Hello, Brian.
You haven't gotten there yet in your discussion, so this will be entirely new. But it's been in the news for anybody who follows the stories for a few years now. It's been in the news that a lot of those funds being collected door to door, there's threats involved, intimidation, extortion, and the people from the community in Canada wanted the law. They, that also suggests by implication that if they're showing up at a rally to protest the law, it's because people back home are being threatened here if they don't show up. That people are told, listen, if you don't come to the rally and fight against the law, even if you really want it, who cares, that you don't fight against the law, this will happen. And so then they have to show up in the numbers because of the fear.
You see, Brian, respond to Brian.
Brian makes a
yes,
good point,
he does.
and it's historically true that other countries, my parents grew up in the Nazi regime, being in Hungary, yes. And basically you showed up at the rallies or you were in trouble, right? So you were cheering these people that you hated. And fear is a tremendous motivator, and if you've got something, especially, not always for the self, maybe for someone else, a family, a loved one somewhere. And that's always a threat. So it's an interesting point that the caller makes. I'm not too sure how much of that applies to a lot of these protesters, but there's no way to prove that.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly, sorry. I just want to say very quickly, I think Brian raises a good point. The point is that the Tamil community in Canada is a complex community. Like all communities are complex. And so you've got to be very careful that you don't generalize and say, well, oh, look, thousands of people came out to this rally. They're all supporters of the Tamil Tigers, you know, and here's the consequence of that. It's a complex community. You have people on various sides. Some people are compelled beyond their own control to show up at these rallies. So let's not label the whole community with the one brush. It's very complex.
We're going to have to go for a break, but food for thought. This is Canada. What is our nation in terms of a Canadian identity? you're watching, you may be thinking, well, what do I know about the Tamil Tigers? What do I know about that history? I may not even have anything to contribute, but you know what you do? You're a Canadian, and my point is this, and I'd like you to listen to it and food for thought during the break. Do you want our country to turn into, perhaps, and I want to hear this from you as well after the break, a place where people are bringing their wars from back home on our soil? We know what's going on in the Middle East. We keep hearing it about the Palestinians, the Jewish people. Do you want to see that happening here, where Palestinian protests are all over the streets and you've got these various groups warring against one another in our country? I want to hear your thoughts. We're going to go for a break. We'll return after this. Stay tuned. Hello again, welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. We're continuing to talk about the rally that happened in Toronto, the Tamils, protesting the fact that Canada outlawed a Tamil group, labeling it as a terror group. But the point of the matter, and the question I'm asking you, I asked it before the break, do you want Canada to become a country where people are bringing the passions of back home, those wars, and bringing them on our soil, where this group is pointing at this group, and both sides in this case are calling each other the terrors in the story? Most Canadians don't even know what that battle is about. Let's hear what you have to say. Sean on line 5. Hi, Sean. You're on the line.
Hello.
Hi, Sean. Go ahead.
Yep. I am a retired Air Force pilot who has come from Sri Lanka, and I knew the concept of atrocities that was committed by the Sri Lankan government, even at the time up to '83. But when I heard about these people banning some kind of money collection going towards the children who are abandoned or become orphans, and that kind of fund was raised. However, if it has been attributed towards the criminal activities of any organization, that may not be good. But however, without going in deep investigation, you just don't ban WTC, that's World Tamil Congress or whatever it is, and look forward for Tamils to agree to the fact they have done the right thing. But if you looked at the number of people that came up at whatever the protest march that they had, it openly says that we don't agree to the fact you just can't take the rights away from people for donating money to some cause.
Any response to this?
Well, again, I think there's a conflict here. I'm
Yes,
sure
there
that
is.
that the Sri Lanka government is not the most democratic, freedom-loving
Yes,
government in the world.
I think everybody can agree with that.
Let's accept that.
Yes.
The other issue, though, is that you can talk all you want about the World Tamil movement, the actual movement itself as a separate from the people. And that has been, I think, under my understanding, thoroughly investigated to be a front for various terrorist activities.
Well, there you go.
So I can't respond on any other basis. Now, if one person comes to me and says, well, I don't believe that all the money is being spent on violence, a lot of it's spent on foreign aid, well, guess what? A lot of terrorists, that's exactly what they spend money on. In fact, that was being done in Lebanon and everything, where you know, the supposed aggressor was coming in with foreign aid and help and things like that. Even the U.S. does it when it's playing a more defensive role. So that's always part of the movement where you gain people's loyalty. It's not all terror. A lot of it's you know, using the carrot instead of the stick. But it's all part of the same purpose and movement. So that's something you have to have experts look at to, you know, I would never say condemn a whole group in terms of any guilt or innocence of anything like that, because I think we're going to be talking about that in the last
Yes, because I want to ask you guys too, is that the kind of a candidate you want to see anyway? And there's more to be said about this, but let's first go to Anne on line 4. Hi Anne, you're on the line.
Hello. I see the feeds of I'm a widow of Air India. I lost my husband on the bombing of Air India, and I see the seeds of this Tamil, what exactly happened to Air India. And I believe that if they need to collect money for orphans or whatever, there are proper other channels to go away, around it than calling big demonstrations that roust up people that can go in the wrong direction. And I definitely see seeds of a tremendous sadness and terrorism plot.
And first and foremost, I'm sorry about your loss, and I'm so glad that you called in. I'd like one of you to respond to this. I know, Husein, you have something to say here.
And I just want you to know that I also lost family members at Air India. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was in Ottawa for the rededication ceremony. So I understand what you're saying, but I think where I need to be cautious is, you know, there's a big difference between what happened to Air India and what I'm hearing about this Tamil movement. What they're accused of, even in the worst case scenario, is about situations that are happening in Sri Lanka, and that's where the fund's going. But I agree that the Tamil community should find alternative ways to raise funds to help those who are in need. And clearly in Sri Lanka, there are many people who are in need. And so the act of getting money, donating money for legitimate causes to alleviate the suffering should still go on.
The big question ends up being, are these funds being legitimately used, or are they being rechanneled into terrorist activities? And that's a lot of the issue here.
That's the issue. The issue that the Tamil communities, from what I'm hearing, I'm not a spokesperson for them, but what I'm hearing is that they're saying no, that we're not a terrorist front, we don't fundraise, and you haven't showed us any evidence. You haven't even spoken with us before you made this decision.
They were waving the guerrilla flags, and it's the big question mark that makes me uncomfortable.
I mean, but you got to be careful. Let's say you have 4,000 people, and you have, of that 4,000 people, 40 people carrying flags. Well, that's 40 too many, I agree, but 40 doesn't mean all 4,000 people. So we got to be careful that we don't generalize, because...
Okay, I want our viewers to hear two sides here, okay? This is a quote that was given by a Sri Lankan-born physician that turned out to the rally. Here's what he said. The Sri Lankan government is, quote, murderous, barbaric regime at war against the Tamil people. Now here's the other side. This is the Sri Lankan Consul General. The Tamil Tigers have killed more Tamil leaders than anyone else. Quote, it's a ruthless organization, he says, and has once again, quote, brought its ruthless war to Canada. is this something that we should be seeing on our soil? Should we be seeing these kinds of battles going on and big question marks? And what part does Canada have to do with this?
Well, I think we need to be careful. I think that what the Sri Lankan consulate is trying to do is trying to rally Canadians against this movement. So we got to be careful. What war on Canada has there really been? I mean, there's been fundraising, agreed.
Well, he didn't say a war on Canada. He just said they're bringing the ruthlessness here because there are a lot of hostilities among the Sri Lankan people. But even among the Sri Lankan people, we're in a democracy. A lot of people leave their country to come here for peace. What's the point if they're bringing it here?
No, but what are they bringing here? In a democracy, in Canada,
you're allowed to.
We're allowed.
But are we being taken advantage of?
We're allowed to lobby the government on international affairs.
Yes, we are.
The Jewish community does it more than any other community. They lobby the Canadian government to support policies in favor of Israel. That happens all the time. We don't think that's illegal. We don't protest against that. If we're allowing groups...
There's no terrorism attached to that.
Yes, it's quite different.
I'll bring 150,000 Palestinians here who say that we've been terrorized by Israel. What I'm saying here is we got to be very careful. If we're going to allow some groups
these people, I think,
to lobby...
They don't even have permits.
Accept both sides as having an equal opinion. And I don't. I'm sorry, I don't. I think one side is more right and the other side is more wrong.
One's occupied and one's occupying.
Okay, from this article, do the two of you agree that it looks as if there was no permit granted, based on what was said here? The article was not explicit, but it did say that it was done quietly the Friday before at an undisclosed location, and the organizer basically gave the excuse, well, we expected large numbers, which a lot of organizations have rallies and have organized events, and they have the venue to suit. But he was saying that it was organized last minute. The Friday it became public, basically. It was out in the open what was happening. By then it was late because we're leading up to the weekend. And considering what the article is also saying, that the police were notified earlier saying that cancel these people's permit because it's an illegal operation. So doesn't it appear, according to the article, that there was no permit?
Yeah, but I think it's a moot point.
Yeah, I think it's a completely side issue. I wasn't even thinking of anything to do with the permit.
Yeah, but you pull together some kind of a rally like this, where you're waving a guerrilla flag with no permit? Well, when hostilities are involved?
I think Robert and I are talking about the bigger issue, though. The bigger issue.
But that is part of the issue here. Are they living according to the laws of this land?
Well, getting a permit, we don't even know if they got a permit or they didn't get a permit.
It seems like they didn't from the article.
That's, again, we have to make an assumption there. And if they did get a permit, does that really change anything? I don't think
that's
so.
If they had a permit, you could at least say, well, they organized it the proper way, they had a permit, instead of sneaking behind the gates to organize.
But I think the bigger issue is what Robert just asked. Is, let's say they got a permit, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Let's say they got a permit. Do we still recognize that as a legitimate protest for this organization? And I think that's where the discussion is.
That's part of the discussion, but I still say it worries me when you have a group that will go out, a group that is very shady because it's being described here as a terrorist group, having some kind of a protest against Ottawa for a decree it passed down outlawing a group behind closed doors and not letting anybody know about it. I say that's part of the issue. Let's hear what our audience has to say. Let's go now to Alex on line 5. Hi, Alex, you're on the line.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm going on your same talking point there, but I was quite interested in making a statement saying that we're a land of opportunity here, and what happens is we allow all these people to come in, and we do love them because we're raised that way. We have all different cultures here, but when they come and don't abide by our laws, why don't we deport them? What is this that we give them all kinds of sanctuary and all kinds of chances, and then we have to, the citizens of our country have to be embarrassed by that I was born in Lebanon. I'm embarrassed by what's going on, and we allow these people to come here, and we should deport them when they do criminal acts, and they have to abide by our laws. Why isn't that forced? I don't get that. And then when we do deport them, we should take their DNA, and we should not allow them back. And we have to protect our country. If we don't learn by other countries, what are we doing here?
Alex, you bring up some good points. We're going to go for a break. We'll get back to you on the phone lines after this. Stay tuned. Hello again, and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. Let's go now to you, Cassian, on line 6. Hello, Cassian, you're on the line.
Hello. My question to the panel is, if the Tamil Tigers could assassinate Rajiv Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, I think they could go to any lengths anywhere in the world. And also they are so well organized in collecting funds in Canada.
Can you turn down your TV, Cassian?
Yeah. So that was my question to the panel.
Respond to this, please.
I don't think I was. I'm not sure if Robert was defending the Tamil Tigers and what their history is. And it's true, a woman who's a supporter of the Tamil Tigers strapped herself with a bomb, went into Rajiv Gandhi and blew herself and him up. But we're not, I am not at least advocating what the Tamil Tigers are doing. What I'm talking about is, one, making sure that we don't label all Tamil Canadians with that same brush.
That I agree with.
And
we
two,
should not label people.
We should recognize that in a democracy there are licenses to protest and to advocate and to lobby.
And if they have that license, what's my point? You hit it. Let's go now to Sherry on line 4. Hi, Sherry, you're on the line.
Hi there. I feel the same way as the gentleman speaking against labeling. I mean, what have we done with the Palestinians in Israel? I mean, we think that that's okay, and yet they're still fighting for a homeland.
We've actually got a show that we've been working on to deal with this Palestinian-Israeli issue. You're talking about labeling, Sherry, but you're bringing up the same thing with the Palestinians and the Israelis. It happens in our society, which, again, I think is your point.
You know, I think
Husein,
there's a negative to the labeling thing. I think you
have
have to be careful not to label the bad guy the good guy, too.
Well, you can't paint everybody with the same...
But that's what happens when you want to, let's not label anybody. Well, who wins in that equation? It's the bad guy that wins.
You bring up a good point.
And okay, so he gets mixed in with all the good people, and that's what I think terrorism's about, is using virtuous people, people who may have other motivations, and using them for your own purposes. Now, I contacted yesterday John Thompson from the Mackenzie Institute, and he told me specifically, see, we're dealing with
on the line shortly, another time.
And he told me specifically, we're talking about two different groups here. You're talking about the World Tamil Movement and the United National Association of Canada, Sri Lanka, and they're kind of having this debate. But he told me quite succinctly that the World Tamil Movement, as the caller suggested, has assassinated 2 heads of state. They are almost the inventors of the suicide bombing, apparently.
Wow.
They are terrorists, and they've had terrorist attacks all the time, and they murder their own just as easily as they would murder other people within that movement. It's just like an organized crime movement. Now, to take that movement and to smear with it all people of a certain culture or of a background is an entirely separate issue and is incorrect. And but I think it's the same mistake to do in reverse, if you know what I'm saying with the label of
Do you see that happening in Canada? Do you see that happening in Canada? I'm throwing out a very politically incorrect question here. We saw what happened in Maclean's, that they were taken to the Human Rights Commission for perhaps perpetuating some of these labels. So the media reports on certain incidents of crime that happens, whether it be terrorism or whatever that crime may be, that perhaps is more among one group. And do you think that in itself contributes to labeling? Where do you draw the line here?
What do you mean? Well,
from the Maclean's point of view, and I can't speak on behalf of Maclean's because we're not here from Maclean's, but their angle would be, for example, all we're doing is reporting the incidents of terrorism in the world, Islamic terrorism, and because we're reporting it, we're being taken to the Human Rights Commission and deemed that we're perpetuating intolerance in society.
Oh, but I don't think that's what the accusation was from Maclean's, by the way. I think that those who brought the complaint against Maclean's, to the Human Rights Commission, BC, and the federal one, is saying that the article in itself by Stein argues that because we can't differentiate between good Muslims and bad Muslims, we should suspect all Muslims. And the complaint was, well, look, aren't you now inciting hatred for a class of people when you can't say the difference between good Muslims and bad Muslims, so therefore they're all bad, or they all should be seen as...
I'll have to get a hold of that exact quote, because much of what you read ends up being reporting, and it ends up being, well, because you're reporting, you're identifying a certain group.
My understanding was that was Mark Stein's article, which was taken out of a book.
Yes,
I've read the book, and I know he went through his book in detail to always make distinctions and always go out of his way not to smear complete groups.
But you see, he was accused of it, and that ends up being a problem in society. You report on something, and then you could get accused of perhaps perpetuating intolerance. And at the same time, we do not want an intolerant society. So where's the balance, guys?
But that's why we have court systems, right? I mean, I'm make a lawyer here, but
when you're a kid walking down the road in a hijab and you get called names because of it, the court system at that point isn't helping you. Speaking on behalf of those who do suffer from intolerance.
I agree. I get called all kinds of names, usually when cars that are driving by and everything to my face. But no, we have racism in society, and that's fine. We all need to overcome and work at making society a more inclusive place. But what I advocate is we have a court system it's a nonviolent way of addressing our grievances. And so in that end, that's fine. If I think you've wronged me, instead of me trying to kill your cat, I'll take you to court and I'll let a judge decide whether I'm right or wrong. And if I'm wrong, I got to pay your legal fees. Sure, this is good for lawyers, and I'm a lawyer, but I like that because it's nonviolent.
It's also, your example's good, but it doesn't fit the example we've been talking about, because that's talking about wronging a group and making a general opinion about not just an individual who can prove harm to him. And we're not talking about a regular court either when we're talking about a Human Rights Commission, where the principles that you admire in the court system are all tossed out the window before you even get in the door. And I have defended people in front of a Human Rights Commission successfully, amazingly, and I'm not a lawyer, which was my in because I could actually criticize the system, but which a lawyer cannot do for. Otherwise, they disbar you, I understand. So anyway, but it's not the same thing, I think. And I think we have to be very careful that multiculturalism practice doesn't become tolerance for intolerance. And I think that's what scares a lot of people.
Great issues being discussed. We'll get back to you after the break. Stay tuned. Hello again. Welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. We're going to move on to our other topics soon, but let's go to you now, Dwayne, on line 1. Hi, Dwayne. You're on the line.
Hi.
Yes, go ahead, Dwayne.
Yes, I was just telling you, I'm incredibly frustrated. I've worked since I was 14 years old. I'm a true Canadian. I'm 59 years old. We've got a health system that's a mess. We have an education system that's a mess. We can still fork out all these monies for these other countries and can't take care of our own. And then these immigrants come in here. They don't follow the law of our land. Laws that we as Canadians have worked to build over 50, 60 years. And they think they have the right to come into this country and bend them anything in their favor. And if they don't get their way, they just take it into the courts and sue. And most times when they sue, they win.
Dwayne, I'm glad you called in with your comments. You can hear the frustration, and I'll tell you, the viewer, some of the most passionate letters I get from viewers does concern the subject matter of, we're proud of Canada. There are a lot of Canadians. You've said that, Husein, on many shows, that you're very proud of our country. We are supposed to have a unified country, and we're proud of our democracy. What is the responsibility on those that are coming in that perhaps are more passionate about their own homeland wars as opposed to, I'm in a new country that's benefiting me. How can I give to that country, as well as, of course, the relationship goes both ways. The country is also providing an opportunity for me. Can you not understand Dwayne's frustration here?
Dwayne's mixing issues there. I don't think you can blame immigrants of any sort for
no, you have to be careful about labeling.
State of our health care and our education system.
No, I think what he was saying, and he's off the line now. If he was on, I'd ask him, but he's talking about the way the country is with our health care system, how wonderful we are as a country. You've got people coming here perhaps not appreciating what we have, and that's the problem.
Or maybe they appreciate it. And you know, it's interesting. I've noticed with a lot of people who've immigrated to the country, they know their rights here better than the average person that was born here. And they're just exercising the same privileges under the law that we would have, or anybody would have.
But we're referring to
we
those
hear it
will,
more from groups that we, quote, object to for some reason.
There are good immigrants in this country that we cannot forget.
The vast majority of immigrants are...
Everybody's immigrant here, if you want to look at it that way.
People got to remember one thing. The first thing is that Canada needs immigrants.
We
need it. We need it economically. We need more and more immigrants. We need 300,000 a year. We're not getting 300,000.
Yes, we do.
We're only getting 250, 225. So we need immigrants to sustain our economy. Number two, the immigrant population, those who have been here 5 years or less, are less inclined into criminal activity than those who are born and raised here. So in terms of as a group, immigrants are less criminally active than others. So before we start labeling all these immigrants who come here and they don't obey our laws, they obey the laws. They obey the laws.
The vast majority do. The vast majority.
Per capita wise, they obey the laws more than those who've been here longer, who were born here. So I just want to be careful that we don't start painting
label everybody, and
these
that
new
is
immigrants.
my concern.
All these guys don't accept Canada. They don't love Canada. Of course,
but
they
there
love
are
Canada.
those who don't. But we need to remember there are those who love Canada. Jack on line 4. Hi, Jack. You're on the line. Go ahead, Jack.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
You look marvelous today.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jack.
I just wanted to call and disagree with the gentleman in the middle about his comment earlier about the, I forget their name, the Tanlin clan creating the suicide bombings. I think it's the Bratsnatis clan from Mongolia.
What was that?
I think he's saying a group from Mongolia was like the first to...
Well, I have no way of knowing. I talked to one of the top leading terrorist experts in the country, and I'm going on his expertise, so I guess it's his expertise that you're criticizing, because I don't really know any facts myself firsthand about any of this issue.
I think this is really, the Tamil Tigers made suicide bombing popular. It may not be that first in history, but they're the ones who sort of popularized it, and I agree with you there.
Okay, thanks for calling in. Let's go on to our second topic now. We're just kind of running out of time here. Now, this Toronto man, I feel for the guy. Here he is. Man loses bid to have OHIP pay for surgery, and I'm going to try to explain this as fast as I can. This fellow, $450,000 in the hole because he was diagnosed at first with cirrhosis of the liver, and that was, and this is critical here, from a tainted blood supply, a blood transfusion he had in the 70s. Well, that got more complicated. He ended up with cancer, and doctors determined that he wouldn't qualify as a liver transplant recipient because he was too far gone. He was given 8 months to live. Well, It's not surprising that the guy would get very desperate at that point to save his life. He went over to England. Funny enough, he did get that transplant. 9 years later, he's still alive, but $450,000 in the hole. He tried to get it out of OHIP through court, and sadly enough, he lost the battle. Do you agree with that? Do you think this man, given the situation, should be $450,000 in the hole? Start with you, Husein.
Well, there's two different questions here. Should this guy be $450,000 in the hole? No, because my heart says no.
Yeah, your heart says no.
Should OHIP pay for it?
Yeah.
No.
Given the tainted blood supply?
It does complicate it, but the answer is still no. Because I try to divorce my emotion and from the facts from, so I just try to look at, here's a person who was going out of country to get an operation, out of province. He was told before he left that it wouldn't be covered. So, you know, that's an important part. He was told before he left, and it's against the OHIP policy that we all, not every single medical issue is paid for. I went and bought prescription drugs a couple days ago. I had to pay for it. I have to recognize that some of my money is going to be spent. This happens to be a very large amount, and therefore we're kind of tugged emotionally. But if it was just $45, we wouldn't have said. The point is, what's the principle? He was told that it wasn't going to be funded. It was out of province. Out of province medical procedures are not covered by OHIP. We know that. And as a result, he's lost every single court case along the way.
You know what, Husein, you're indeed a good lawyer. You can't argue that legally. But from an exception point of view, are there sometimes exceptions to a rule?
The only time I consider this an exception is because the tainted blood probably came from Ontario.
That's what disturbed me.
Not the amount.
That's what disturbed me.
Not the amount. The amount shouldn't be.
And that's what got him sick.
It's because, and I don't know the full facts, I must confess, but did he get tainted blood from an Ontario hospital that was the negligence of that Ontario hospital? If so, maybe he's got a cause of action against that Ontario hospital.
That's you know, I would think.
I agree. Perhaps that would have been the better way. Perhaps that would have been the better route. Yes.
But you know, there's also built into this expectation of free medical service for everybody.
You're talking across the board.
Yeah, right across the
board. You're against OHIP across the board, though.
Not really. I'm in favor of competition in insurance.
Not universal health care.
Universal health care is a pseudonym for single payer, one payer, and that's the government for certain services. That's what they mean by universal health care. They mean nobody else can pay for it, including you. You can't even pay for your own service if OHIP covers it. And that is wrong. That's what I disagree with. And everybody says I disagree with OHIP all the time. In fact, our party policy is that you should be able to pay a premium for OHIP.
You should be able to. You think you should be able to buy yourself to the front of the line in some of these cases?
Well, there should be no lines at all in any healthy system. You know, this person, just talking about the price, the $450,000. I have to ask myself, how did he do that? I know that open heart surgery at Mount Sinai Hospital is $33,000 to $50,000, and you wonder why it's so high. It didn't include the cost of the organ that he got. That was donated. So where does that kind of money go? And I've heard of other surgery being done.
I don't know how long it took. I don't know how long he was in and out of hospitals in England.
So it could be supply and demand situation. It could be
dollar could have been $2.5 to £1. Like there's so many issues.
But think of the question, or if OHIP limits its coverage of things based on cost, let's put it that way. Just for the fun of it, I sat down and I said, well, okay, if he's lived for 8 years, that works out to $56,000 a year. If he lives for 20 years, then that cost would have been down to $22,000. Do we limit our insurance expenses? Because you know how people always say a life is, you know, priceless, which it is to the person who possesses it. It isn't that priceless to somebody else. Everybody's own life is precious to them. So is there a line at which they draw, you know, how much is too much? Because you could spend $1 million on
And we want to hear your thoughts on the subject. We're going to get straight back to you after the break. Stay tuned.
Frank and I are not counsel together. we have
You come on with Frank Diamond on this issue?
No, we
I was just wondering if I could pick your brains.
Oh, no, thank you. Hello again, and welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. We're continuing to talk about that heartfelt medical situation. Let's go now to Margaret on line 1. Hi, Margaret, you're on the line.
Yes, I would just like to say that I would be willing to give if someone would make a collection, because it is a very sad situation, and I'm sure he was pretty desperate.
Yes, maybe you should start one on the web. Somebody, I have to say,
point there.
She's got a great point.
That would be. You think that would be the kind of person that a government healthcare system particularly would look after? But there's no votes in only going after the small groups of people who have crises. The vote is in giving everybody free, walk-in doctor service type of thing, which I think everyone should be paying for, because you're only talking $20 to $50. You're using all that money up millions of times over
some people,
for real.
$20 to $50 is a lot of money for some people.
Well, it might be, but if you're
minimum wage.
But that's a separate issue. Again, ability to pay. We have a lot of people who can pay that and don't, and to me that can't be good for the people who need the money out of the same system. I'm not justifying it on that basis, but it certainly speaks counter to the intent of what government insurance is supposed to be about.
The two things that make me really sympathetic toward this guy is, number one, he got his illness from a tainted blood supply here, presumably in Ontario, as you said, Husein. And the second one is, doctors told him he had no chance, that he was in an advanced stage of cancer, and there was no chance to put him on that list. Well, he went to England and he ended up getting that transplant. 9 years later, he's here. Those are the two things that make me feel really bad for the guy. I know it's a separate issue.
Maybe true that he didn't have any chance here.
Good point, too.
I think it was an experimental. It was an experimental process in England, and so they didn't know, but it was worth the risk, and
certainly to him
it was, yeah. But to Margaret's point, I think the man's name was Flora, F-L-O-R-A.
Adolfo Flora.
Adolfo Flora. So perhaps if you could look him up and get it, and that's a great idea. I'm sure there's people in Canadian society who would love to donate to help this person out. But
yeah, that's right. Good point, Margaret. Let's go now to Mariel on line 6. Hello, Mariel. You're on the line.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I think that the OHIP should have just covered him. The other gentleman there was saying something about, he had to pay for his prescription and everything. You can't even compare that to a man's life. I think that this country's always had a pretty good medical history. Up until maybe lately we're having problems with it, but I think this gentleman should have been covered, especially if he had tainted blood from right from here.
Well, yes, go ahead.
Well, no, what I'm more concerned about is having set rules in place that everyone gets treated equally. Just because this person's situation and the amount of money is so large doesn't mean that we should bend the rule or break the rules for him. because then tomorrow someone's going to say, well, I was in Florida and I decided to get a nose job, and you know, is that going to be covered? And yeah, so we got to be careful that we have set rules and everyone knows what the rules are, and then we should abide by those rules.
But rules in society, they do get bended and manipulated sometimes, and sometimes there are exceptions. And I say, you know, I can't argue with you, Husein. We do have certain rules, and if OHIP doesn't cover it, they don't. The greatest point you mentioned there was perhaps it should have been pursued some other way as opposed to going after OHIP.
We should have more options. We should have private health insurance. Maybe if you'd been able to have some competing private health insurance, that might have cut into half of that expense, that kind of thing. But I definitely agree with what I'm hearing here.
I do. You can't argue it. You really can't.
The insuring agent has an issue too. If they're making all their investments based on certain expectations of what the law is, and then the law changes, like it's playing a monopoly game and changing the rules in mid-game, you can't do that.
We're going to go for a break very shortly. Kathy on line 4. Hi, Kathy. You're on the line.
I wanted to make a comment on the gentleman who said that going to the doctor for $20 or $30 or $50 that he feels that should be paid. I think that is in error, and it's a generalization that people can pay that amount, can actually afford it, and it also is hurting the most vulnerable.
Kathy, we're going to have to go for a break, but I'll let Robert reply to what you just said after the break. Stay tuned. Hello again. Welcome back to Viewpoints on the Line. We're continuing to talk about the heartfelt issue about the gentleman in Ontario, $450,000 in the hole. OHIP won't cover it, lost his battle in court for that coverage, took it overseas to get that transplant surgery, and again, he's out $450,000. Diana, on line 1, what do you think about this issue?
Hi. Are you there?
Yes, we are. We're listening to you.
Hi. Yes, I'm at the tail end of this discussion, but I feel I have something relevant to comment. Gastric bypass surgery is covered by OHIP, and this is a condition that's caused by people simply eating too much. This poor guy here who had to go to England to have this operation, he's alive now, but it was something with his blood that was our fault or the hospital's fault. Yes, I feel OHIP should cover it. And the gastric bypass thing, that is of our own choice. We eat food or we don't eat too much or we eat too little.
Diana, thanks for calling in and sharing that comment. Now, Husein, your point of view, you can't put any holes in it. It was totally based, both of you, it was totally based on the legalities of the situation. What Diana is saying here is not the same thing, obviously, from the point of view of what you were saying. He went ahead and did it anyway, and it's not covered. But on behalf of what Diana is saying, this is something I mentioned to you during the break, that I believe, from my perspective, that people see the injustice in the situation, the life and death situation attached. And I think that's what really makes people feel it. I'd like you to comment on, well, what Diana put forth here.
I think the biggest motivation for people supporting, quote, free government health care is selfishness, basically, because they don't want to see that happening to them. And I've run into this all the time. And it's interesting that someone would complain about, for example, the inability of some people to pay $20 to $50. Well, how's that going to affect this person who has a $450,000 bill for something very serious, not, and possibly caused by the very healthcare system that he depends upon.
And that's the injustice caused by the very healthcare.
There's definitely an injustice here, but
yes,
an illegality, a moral one, maybe on that level. But again, I'm not saying people shouldn't have any access to that type of inexpensive insurance. That's a separate issue. But people who can pay and are able to pay, why shouldn't they?
Words to close, Husein?
Well, I take a bit different perspective. One of the things that makes Canada the greatest country in the world is that we as a nation volunteer more than any per capita.
Yes.
We are people who give for others, and it's great that all these people are feel sad and compassion for this person. But so that's great, but unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily mean that we should fund
Touting Canada, great note to close on. That's all the time we have. See you again next time. I'm Christine Williams, and from all of us, thank you for watching.